Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're all about getting to the heart of complex topics, and today we're diving into something pretty significant, the WACC Act, and the big changes it's seen with these 2025 amendments.
It's a fascinating area, really. For our listeners who might not be familiar, we're talking about the laws governing those religious and charitable endowments in India, those properties dedicated for pious, religious, or charitable purposes under Muslim law.
Right, and these WACCs, they have a long history, and they still play a big role today, both socially and economically.
Absolutely, they really do.
So we've got some great analysis to work with here, comparing the original 1995 Act with these 2025 changes. What we really want to do in this deep dive is unpack those key shifts, understand what they could mean going forward, and just see why they matter in the bigger picture of how these important institutions function.
Sounds good.
So let's start with the basics. How has the actual definition of a WACF changed?
Well, one thing that really stands out is this move toward really formalized documentation. You see, the 1995 Act included this concept of walk by user, meaning if a property had been used for religious purposes for a long time, it could qualify as a WAF. But the 2025 amendment, it changes things up. Now, the donor has to have practiced Islam for at least 5 years, and that walk by user idea, it's gone.
Oh, so a much stricter definition now.
Yeah, I think the aim is to reduce any ambiguity and make it harder for people to make fraudulent claims based on, maybe some vague historical usage. It could make legal processes smoother, but it could also have an impact on communities that have used land for religious purposes for generations, even if they don't have all the official paperwork.
I see. So more clarity, but also potentially some challenges for a certain group.
Exactly. And there are some other interesting additions. We now have specific definitions for Aga Khanewak and Borawak.
What's the thinking behind those?
It seems to be about recognizing the unique practices of those communities when it comes to administering these endowments. It's about acknowledging that one size doesn't necessarily fit all.
That makes sense. And there's also a brand new definition for government property, right?
Yes, that's a really important clarification. The 2025 Act is very clear. Government property, whether it belongs to the central government, state governments, or local bodies, cannot be declared as WAF property.
So no more disputes over whether a government building can be a WAF.
That seems to be the goal. It's about setting clear boundaries and addressing those concerns about Waqf boards maybe overreaching and claiming government land.
Okay, clear boundaries are always a good thing. Now let's talk about the Waqf boards themselves. It seems like their powers have been adjusted quite a bit.
Yeah, definitely. One major change is that Section 40 from the 1995 Act, the one that gave the Waqf Board the power to just declare a property as a WAF, and that's been removed.
No more unilateral declarations.
Right. And instead, we have this new Section 3C, which gives the state government the power to investigate if a property has been wrongly declared as a WAF, especially when it comes to government property.
Interesting. So there's more centralized oversight now in that area.
Definitely. It's a pretty significant shift in authority.
Okay, so who actually sits on these boards? Has anything changed there?
Yeah, there have been some interesting changes in terms of representation. The Central Waqf Council now has to include 2 non-Muslim members appointed by the central government.
What's the reasoning there?
Well, it seems like the idea is to bring in different perspectives and make the council more inclusive. And it's not just at the central level. Some state Waqf boards can now have a non-Muslim CEO. And in places like Delhi, there are specific rules about who needs to be represented on the board.
Like who?
They have to have representatives from Shia and Sunni communities, backward class Muslims, and even non-Muslims. It's a real push for broader representation in the governance of these Waqfs.
It definitely signals a change in how they're thinking about these institutions. Let's move on to the more practical side of things, managing these properties. Are there any big changes there?
Absolutely. So all those pending surveys of WAC properties, those are being moved from the survey commissioner to the district collector. The goal there is to better integrate the whole process with how revenue administration works.
Streamlining things.
Right. But the biggest change, and I think this is huge, is the introduction of this central online portal and database.
What's it for?
This portal is going to be for all WAC registrations, accounts, audits, everything. All existing WACs have 6 months to upload all their key details, like their boundaries, how the property's being used, their income, all of it. It's a major step toward digitizing the whole system.
Wow, that does sound like a big change. It should make things a lot more transparent, right?
That's the idea. It could really improve accountability and make it much easier to track what's going on with these WAC properties.
Now, one issue that always comes up with WAFs is encroachment. Has anything changed there with these amendments?
Well, one thing that hasn't changed is that Waqf boards are still exempt from that general 12-year limitation period for reclaiming encroached property.
So they have more time than other landowners to get their property back.
Exactly. There's no time limit for them. And the Joint Parliamentary Committee, the group of MPs that reviews legislation, they've recommended even stricter penalties for encroachment. And of course, the Waqf Tribunal, they still have the power to decide how much someone has to pay in damages if they've been occupying Waqf property illegally.
So a pretty clear message that they're serious about protecting Waqf properties. But what happens if there's a dispute? How does that get resolved under the new rules?
Okay, this is where we see another key change. Before, whatever the Waqf Tribunal decided, that was final. But now, with the 2025 Act, you can actually appeal their decision to the High Court.
So another layer of review.
Exactly. You have 90 days to file an appeal. And the way the tribunals themselves are composed has changed too. They've removed the requirement to have a Muslim law expert on every tribunal, and now the focus is on having people with judicial and administrative experience.
So a more legally focused approach.
You could say that, although our sources seem a bit unclear about whether a Muslim law expert might still be included in some cases. That's something to keep an eye on.
Okay, so last but not least, what are the new rules around actually creating a waqf? What do people need to do now?
So the new conditions are very specific. The person donating the property has to have practiced Islam for at least 5 years. They have to legally own the property, and they need to be capable of transferring ownership.
Pretty straightforward.
Right. And as we discussed earlier, Waqf by user is out. And there's a very clear statement that Waqf al-Awlad, which is a waqf specifically for the benefit of the donor's family and descendants, that can't be used to deny anyone their inheritance rights, especially women.
Good clarification.
Yeah. And a formal waqf deed is now mandatory for every new waqf.
So no more informal agreements.
It seems that way. They really want to make sure everything is properly documented.
So if we take a step back and look at all these changes together, it seems like there's some really big themes emerging.
What do you see?
Well, there's definitely a much stronger emphasis on state oversight and control. There's a huge push for digitalization and transparency, making sure everything is out in the open. And then there's this idea of making the administration of waqfs more inclusive, bringing in different voices and perspectives, plus some fundamental changes in how waqfs are created and how disputes are handled.
Absolutely. I think those are all spot-on observations. These amendments, they represent a pretty significant shift in the legal landscape surrounding waqfs in India.
And like with any big change, there are potential pros and cons.
For sure. I mean, there's a lot of potential good that could come out of this. More transparency could make things more efficient, reduce corruption, and build more trust. Greater inclusivity could lead to better decisions and fairer outcomes. And these new rules around creating and managing waqfs, those could help prevent disputes and protect the interests of everyone involved.
But there are also those concerns about whether the Waqf boards are losing too much autonomy, whether these new restrictions on donors might discourage people from creating waqfs, and whether these changes might actually slow things down and make the process more bureaucratic.
Definitely valid concerns, and it's going to be really interesting to see how all of this plays out in practice.
It is. And for our listeners out there, what we really want you to think about is this. How do you think all these legal changes are going to reshape the landscape of these religious and charitable endowments in India? How will they impact how these waqfs interact with society and with the government in the coming years? It's a really complex issue, and it brings up all sorts of questions about how we balance modernization with preserving tradition, especially when it comes to legal reforms like this.
It'll definitely be a fascinating journey to follow.
Absolutely. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll see you next time.